Thanks so much, Graham, and thanks to everybody as you dial on. We just thought we'd start with a little poll. We're conscious that we've a large number of attendees today. Currently seeing 103 people on as people join through. And we know that there's almost nobody in the working world in the UK who isn't impacted by this debate and discussion around hybrid. So we thought we'd check in briefly on what folk wanted to get out of today. Interestingly, if you wind back the clock, almost 10 months ago, we have a number of roundtable conversations, and it was a client from a large manufacturing area who said, the thing I'm struggling with is some people are in now and some people are out. And they just said, it's this hybrid working thing. And it was the start. And people went through a period of many months of saying, we just don't know where to start. And it seems like, based on what I'm reading in front of me from the Menti poll, that actually most people are now starting on their journey. They're starting to pick a path around hybrid. A few people who are concerned about key talent, a few people are worried about teams losing cohesion. Some of you have come just to experience it and have a look. That's great. We really want to encourage you today to take off if you're from an HR or leadership background, be a bit selfish today. Take off your thinking about the broader business perspective. Do try and experience this. Have a think about how this might help you and your teams. Some of you want to see best practice. Very happy to talk through what we've got today. And somebody else has just typed, they'll type something else in the chat. And as Graham said, we will revisit that chat as we go. Just for your awareness, I don't, just because I'm on one screen, have full visibility of the chat, but we will do a session at the end where we wrap up on any questions that come through. So it's great to check in on why you're here. I'll tell you why we're here. And we're here because we're passionate about people. And most of you will know LHH, but briefly for those of you who don't know, we are a preeminent and passionate talent organisation. Alexandra and Ed, my colleagues, will introduce themselves at the start of their sessions. Thanks for the wave, guys. And all you need to know about me is I started off training towards being a psychologist. I then worked at two large consultancies. I've always worked in and around people and teams. And I am at home at the moment. And during the pandemic, I already had a toddler and I had a set of twins right at the start of the pandemic. So in terms of living this hybrid world, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you today about really does come from the heart. And I know a lot of you will work in fields where you're passionate about people and teams. So let's try and have a talk about how we can make life best for them in this hybrid environment. So what are we going to do today? We're going to share some big picture thinking. Some of you may have read some of the viewpoints that we put across. We'll bring a few of those to life. I'll be doing that at the start. We also want to hear from you. We're conscious this is an evolving picture, so we thought it'd be useful via chat and via Menti to take some polls, just to a sense check of what's coming out from our client and contact base. Then Ed and Alexandra will talk you through one of our core offerings. We have a broad church of offerings here: executive coaching, workshops, webinars, assessments. So really what we've done today is we've picked our core standard journey for managers. We'll bring that to life, but please do, as it says on the ground rules on the right, if there's something today where you think, well, I quite like that session, but I'd like to talk about with LHH about our specific problems, we'd love to hear from you to talk that through. A couple of other ground rules or things for you to be aware of. I've mentioned we'll take polls. They will be completely anonymous. They won't be shared even as a marketing material. We can't be confident they're statistically sound, so you're not taking part in an experiment. They're completely anonymous, so please do feel free to share honestly and selfishly. So don't think about your broader business, think about you and your teams. All the lines are muted, but please do use the chat function or the Q&A function to submit questions. So let's get underway with some big picture thinking here. The first thing I'd like to hear about really is you. So if you go to www.menti.com and mention and enter the code that Graham mentioned at the top of the call, it should also be at the top of the screen. What I'd like to do is get a view of the 133 people on the call. On the left-hand side of this and on the right-hand side of this plot here, that's how fixed your company has been, or you believe they'll be, about having to be in the office. So if it's everybody, we need you in all the time, you'll be on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is go work from a coffee shop, work from a bus, go scuba diving if you can dial in doing that, whatever it is, do what you want. And then I'd like a view of how likely you are to stay and how likely you are potentially to leave. And let's just have a little check-in here. And again, there's no judgment, you know, just trying to sense check what's come out of broader industry data with what we've got right in front of us today. All right, let's have a little look. And I'm actually going to enter my own, but I'm going to be careful about when I time it, just so that people don't necessarily know what my intentions are. All right, so that's just coming through for us now. It's of course tricky to pick out a precise trend, but let's have a little look here. It looks like more people are pretty engaged and likely to stay, but it also looks like a percentage of people are looking at leaving, or at least thinking about it. And as we see these data points come through, I can tell you anecdotally what we receive in a lot of our sessions is it's so much easier now to have a think about making a move. There aren't those barriers. You don't necessarily have to leave the office, put a suit on covertly to go for an interview. It's just so much easier to actually have a little look around. You can have your LinkedIn open and have a look around. You can have your calls scheduled in between two of your employer-based calls. So it's just really interesting seeing this come to life. I think in the round what we can see is more people at the moment on this call are towards the flexible end, and more people are looking likely to stay. And I'd love to draw a line through that starts to illustrate that maybe people are more likely to leave if they've got that strict mandate. But we just want to make sure that we don't get caught up in a hype machine, and actually we do kind of get a realistic picture of where people are at. So thanks a lot for your answers. Let's have a look and see what the broader research is doing. So these are statistically sound, large number groups, so more than 500. And what we're looking at here is the first of these big trends. There was a big edict at the start from many executives from large organizations saying, good news, the pandemic is closing down in the main, and we'd like you back in. So what you're seeing is on the left-hand side, how the C-suite believed the day-to-day office life would operate before and after the pandemic. And you can see there, 92% pre-pandemic believed that people would be in the office mostly, and post-pandemic, that's down to 52%, but there is 0% of the C-suite who believe that actually people can be in 1 day a week. So that predominantly distant view of work isn't as prevalent in the C-suite, but if you look at employees, so C-suite minus 2, 3, 4, 5 downs, actually you can see there are much more pronounced bias towards working in the office. And that's led to 4 million resignations in the States in April. Of course, we can't be completely clear on causation and correlation, but we know that a lot of people have felt less stuck to their company. A lot of people have done some looking around, and that has brought this unprecedented amount of exits from organizations. A lot of people saying that actually they're very likely to leave if they are made to go back to work. And it's not just about people leaving, it's actually the struggle now to attract talent. And many of you working in HR will be familiar with this. It's actually very hard if you're an organization who doesn't offer hybrid working in some form to attract the best. Is tricky. The other kicker here is a lot of junior resources we speak to, actually they quite like being around the buzz of an office. Many of them have been working in bedrooms at their parents' homes, and actually they're quite keen to get out, socialize, be part of an organization and really feel connected to it. So you have this sandwich of the C-suite who very much want to in, more junior resources who want to be in, but the middle, people you've invested in developing maybe for 10, 12 years, maybe now they have families, they're primary caregivers, actually suits them more to be at home. So, that's a real challenge for the industry, is how to keep all those people happy. So I'm just doing some scene setting here. The second broader theme is the presence of burnout. Now, I did originally have a poll in here around how burnt out people are happening. I did a few practices and a few practice conversations, and actually in the round, there was very little value from actually taking the poll, because the majority of people were in violent agreement that at some point during the pandemic, they've been feeling burnt out. But on the face of it, productivity has increased. So what you can see on the left-hand side, Gartner interviewed over 5,000, surveyed over 5,000 people, and actually individual productivity has gone up. Number of documents made, number of calls handled, number of meetings held. Team productivity on the face of it has gone up, and customer satisfaction on the face of it has also gone up. But that has come at that human cost. People have just been going from meeting to meeting to meeting with almost no break. And one of the main things we need to make people aware of, and if we were in a full manager course, I'd be asking us to do a breakout right now to say, well, managers, how are you aware of this? In a hybrid world, if half your team are at home, half your team are in the office, everybody's commuting in, how are you going to just have that sense of how my team are doing? Are you going to pick up on all the non-verbals that come in a meeting? You can see somebody getting a bit stressed. What's the signs you can pick up on? And there are some that we can pick up on. We'll be doing a prompt around some practical tips that we can employ to keep an eye on. So the next thing is this, and this is where I need some input from you again. It's hard out there. We know it's hard if it's just you and your laptop. There isn't that team buzz around you. There isn't a broader sense of being around people. If you have a difficult call, there's no colleague to turn to immediately necessarily. And I want to check in here around this sense of connection. So what I'd like you to do is go back to menti.com, and you're just going to give me a sense of how connected. Now, you can interpret connected how you want, but I would say it's that feeling of closeness, communication, day-to-day interactivity with your immediate team. So in my case, that would be my fellow solution leads within LHH. Peripheral team. So in my case, that would be my solution leads, project managers. It's the overall team. And then adjacent teams. So we work with them quite regularly. So in my case, that might be Graham, who runs our marketing division here. We've interacted because of this, but it's sort of seasonal interaction. And then other teams. So for example, in my case, that would be finance. And we're just seeing that come through here, and you can see there's quite a pronounced trend. We banked on this coming through. Is actually, if you look, if 2.5 in the middle is neutral, most people are reporting that their immediate team, so not even their whole team, their immediate team, we've almost seen the emergence of clans. And there might be a Teams chat or a WhatsApp group, but often there are these little side chats, our team, our space, our chat, and teams have actually become increasingly polar and tribal about their own interactivity. And if there's a challenging meeting, rather than turning to one person, sometimes it's easier to go to an overall Teams chat and say, oh, what did you think about this? I didn't think the way so-and-so spoke to you was fantastic. And you can see there are tensions that are starting to appear. And actually with our immediate team, we've become almost, in some senses, closer. There was a brilliant report by Microsoft that reported the amount of people who've cried in front of key colleagues has actually increased. So maybe there's a negative in the fact that there's more burnout, but maybe people are starting to be more open with their immediate team around them. But we start to see peripheral teams who perhaps we ought to be collaborating with closely, starting to be less close than our immediate teams, and then adjacent teams drifting further away. We mentioned about productivity going up, but in the face of burnout, what we're starting to see here already happen, and hybrid will only place more pressure on this, is actually this gradual drift. And a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, used to work in the army. He went to Sandhurst, and he described to me the only way they could simulate the stress of a battle situation was actually to do exercises where they denied people sleep and they denied people rest. And it was to make sure that the officers in the British Army learned to communicate despite being tired, to make sure they looped in their teammates and their colleagues. And we've talked about how burnout is present for almost everyone. If you're in a team and you're running hot and you're getting more and more burnt out, are you going to have the energy to actually reach out to your broader team? You're trying to keep up with this faster spinning hamster wheel of products in the short term. Are you going to loop in a colleague who might provide some constructive input, but may actually slow you down? And that microcosm debate, and I'm sure is a situation that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, you can start to see that play out. So this came out of Microsoft's report on this. Innovation is starting to drop off. Team collaboration is starting to drop off. Employee inclusion was starting to drop off. And intent to stay, we talked about up front, was starting to drop off. And it's just as a result of us all sitting and baking in this environment. And employees do want change. So people don't like feeling disconnected. People don't like the absence of an overall connection. And actually 67% of people did say they want that feeling of being back in and that buzz and that razzmatazz of being in. But one of the things at the time when this was done, which is a couple of months now, was actually not a lot of teams and leadership had come out and said, okay, actually this is our vision for hybrid, this is how it's going to work. So you can start to see, if you were somebody who was minded to maybe leave, you're working harder and harder and harder, actually you're getting more and more narrow. Actually, you can see how you lose that identity and connection with the overall company. Start to home in on your tribe immediately, and you can start to see how that causes problems for productivity and innovation. Now, we're going to talk about innovation in a minute, and about conscious innovation versus incidental innovation. But I just wanted to hold that macro level concern that I'm sure many of you have there around, actually, are we going to start to drift? Are we going to get less productive than our competitors? And a key part of that is our people. How do we attract them? How do we get them on board? How do we get them to know what the company is all about? And I just want you to think through with your selfish manager hat on now. And just have a think through around these key processes. Actually, do you think hybrid will make this easier or harder and less effective in the next 6 months? So I'm going to do this as well, and I'll talk through as we do it. So the first one is recruitment, and actually getting people in the door, getting the right people in the door. Is that going to be harder or easier? Functional onboarding. So actually, welcome, here's SharePoint, here's the org structure, here are our core values, here's a description of everything, here's a round robin of conversations with your team. Cultural onboarding. So that feeling of what behaviors are going to fly, what behaviors aren't going to fly. And I thought this would be a really interesting thing for us as a group to check in on. Performance management. How do I know if someone's around and really doing fantastic work? And this will be some of the theming that Ed and Alexandra bring to life for you down the track, is actually how we deal with that. Formal development. So I'm going to put you on a training course. I'm going to develop you in a particular code. Informal development. So I'm going to learn a little bit about something because I overheard a colleague talking about it. And then proactive work. So actually doing doing new things, innovating, actually coming up with a new drive or a new initiative and just being very productive. And then that crisis management, issue resolution. So I've just talked through those and entered them, and hopefully that's brought them to life for you. And we'll just give it a minute to kind of for these to flush through. And I'll talk you through some of the things that we're hearing. So actually functional onboarding, did a focus group with a consultancy 2 weeks ago. And actually they said the quality of their functional onboarding has actually been higher. And the net promoter score coming out of onboarding has been higher because you're actually able to connect with someone on a one-to-one without other people around. Maybe they're a bit more honest about how the company is. Maybe you feel a better personal connection. Actually, you're being shared through documents. You're aware all the documents are stored. Let me get a document on screen. You're not in a meeting room looking around one slide. You've got perfect visibility of all the functional and technical documentation. But cultural onboarding, your output tallies exactly with what we're seeing more broadly. Actually getting somebody to feel the company. And if you've got somebody with a team, remember we've got our selfish hats on today, that's specialism, about our team special because we do X, Y, and Z. Getting people to feel really truly included in that company, that team, that business unit is really hard. And the other one that people are really finding tricky is that informal development. So we're very pleased to have an elite sports team who we're doing a project with at the moment. And actually they have this massive concern about actually somebody's having a conversation around a particular trick that they've learned, a particular way of doing something, actually just being around that and picking up on it. It's very hard to track that stuff, but actually how do we keep that front of mind? Now, when most people consider this, they are truly thinking back to a fully work from home scenario. And there are ways in which we can adjust a hybrid balance to make sure that the bits we're concerned about damaging are retained, and also that we optimize the best way to do these things. So if we find that functional onboarding is better as a result, or as good, maybe that's an activity if we want to offer hybrid to, that we can to do in a hybrid virtual way. So if we were in a manager's full course, what I'd be doing right now is asking you all to break out, have a consideration about these key processes and saying, right, what's special about us? What do we want to keep? And what do we want to actually do in the office? And which one of these work best? The other one I'll bring through to life now is some of these myths that are coming through. And this is the end of the big picture thinking, and then we'll cut to some of the applicable content with Alexandra and Ed. So there are a few myths. I'm actually going to start at number 2, which is the water cooler conversation. And we have this had this tendency at the start of the pandemic, particularly, to just layer on meetings. We've got to have a meeting about this. We've got to have a meeting about that. And actually, hybrid is an opportunity to strip away and be purposeful about our meeting structure. I just invite you now, look around you at the objects around you. Maybe have a look at some of the apps you've got on board. How many of those were actually invented on purpose? I'm going to look around my area. Most of the things I'm looking at were invented, 90% of them on purpose. And we love the romance of an accidental invention. So the ones that always get banded around are things like the Post-it note and how that was invented from some failed super glue. We love the anecdotes around the accidental water cooler moments, but we love those because they're exceptional. And actually, most of the products that people develop are intentionally designed and created in a more stable environment. If you're in a highly volatile crisis-solving environment, perhaps you need that additional granularity of conversation, the free-form format of all being in the office. But actually, even in an agile software environment, Gartner came out and did a brilliant report yesterday or last week from their conference around actually which parts of an agile development cycle can be done from home. And actually, they came to the conclusion you could do them all at home. But this is where we need to get to a conversation about individuals and your own development life cycles. But the myth of the water cooler conversation and layering on meetings has led to more and more people feeling burnt out. Their time is squeezed. I can only do work in the evening. And as we layer on the added hassle of a commute, day-to-day interruptions that are helpful in the office, actually, we have to get smart about meetings. So that's the first. The second, we'll go to the top now, one rule for some and not for others. I had a very close colleague of mine who now works at an architecture firm. At the start, they said, well, we just want everybody to be happy and give them what they want. They encountered so many queries, they've now swung towards actually, we need everyone in. And you have to justify your exit from office day-to-day working and almost have a conversation about flexible working. And sure enough, they saw a lot of talent leave as a result of that. So it's not really about we must have one rule, it's about a consistent framework. So I often in a session around that talk about, there's a brilliant Douglas Bader quote, if anybody knows who he is. He was a pilot, and he said, rules are for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise men, which now he'd updated to wise people. But actually, frameworks, principles that can be flexibly applied. And that would be where, if in a manager session we were holding it, I'd be inviting people to go into a breakout and say, how would this land with my team? And the last thing is around visibility. So one of the things we're going to talk to you today, and Alexandra and Ed bring this to life, is about how do you as a manager, particularly for somebody who likes to know what's happening, step away, establish trust, psychological safety, and actually helping people to focus on end outcomes rather than having to be in every single step of every single process. I have a good friend who works in a software company. They had a huge drive on gamification around e-learning and trying to get people to engage. They ran an experiment where people were commenting and they were encouraged to comment and voted and tracked on who did the most comments. And they had something like 2,000 comments produced in a week. It was insane. But when they did the actual review of it, what they found was a lot of those comments were non-value add. So we've got to be very, very careful, and we have to ask our managers, and ask you if you're a manager on the call today, what am I actually going to invest my time and energy tracking? And what am I going to not spend my time, and consciously build trust with my team so I don't have to track? All right, I'm going to cut to Alexandra and Ned in a minute, but let's talk about some key principles that we believe are really important. It's a balancing act. So everyone's view of hybrid will be different. Everyone wanted to know different things about hybrid at the start of this. There were a lot of people wanting to know best practice. And there are a lot of very polarizing views coming out at the moment. And it's quite fashionable in our industry to have a strong stance. You must have a strong stance. But actually, our view is it's a balance. You've got to apply purpose and drive, that cohesion of overall purpose. How do you stop people being focused on their individual tribe and start to think about the overall purpose, mission of the company? So one of the things that has been reported to us is people used to come into the office and see and feel that culture and have big pictures on the wall and quotes and awards the company had won, and having that overall sense of what the bigger company was about. So what can we do to actually revisit that constantly? Some practical tips will be sharing success stories, wins, making sure that when we're in the office, we actually really do talk the talk. And actually making sure that we manage and track people on the right items. Belonging and best contribution, how do we break down those barriers and make sure that people are comfortable to say, actually, I've got an opinion here. And how do we build on the other side, the receiving end of things, actually, I'm going to reach out. So I'd be asking managers in this course to have a think about that, and Alexandra will talk you through some of that. And the third component is flexibility. We know this is going to be an evolving piece. We know on a day-to-day basis you're going to be doing some proactive work, and a crisis will evolve. We know that things are going to change. How do we get out of cranking out productivity and burning everyone out to being great, flexible managers and leaders who can adjust our style as we go? So those are our three key things that we believe across all our sessions we run. And the last thing before we get going, I'll talk you through the session format in a minute, is launching. So just as a manager running your own team, just have a little sense check against these. Are you clear on how you'll get clear? So this was particularly applicable a couple of months ago. At the start of the pandemic, a lot of people were saying, our company isn't really clear on this. I've heard rumors about this. Actually, be clear on how you'll get clear. What's the process you're running? Co-create that vision. So there is a degree of contracting with employees here, not formal contracting, but actually we were in a meeting, guys. We agreed these would be our behaviors. Having that co-creation that people consciously buy into. We've talked about avoiding one size fits all. We've talked about risk assessing your key processes. Leadership role modeling is going to be really important as well. So actually ask yourself, am I sat working from home, orchestrating all these policies? How many times have I gone in? When I've gone in, have I encouraged my team to go in? And when we go in, have I gone over and approached other teams and tried to build that sense of connection? One of the broader things we talk about in one of our sessions is about how do you actually affect change and implement your vision for hybrid. There are a lot of conscious, tangible things you can do, policies, communications. But the intangibles, like somebody going into the office and it's flat and it's empty, actually being seen to behaviorally constantly, consciously get up and get around the whiteboard, role modeling it. So using that physical and emotional levers for change. And number 7, be prepared to adjust. So we've seen a lot of organizations where they've got in touch with us, a Peakon score has dropped perhaps because they've come out and they've said something quite bold and employees haven't liked it. So just being clear with employees, this is an evolving dialogue, we're partnering with you, we want to make this work for everybody. So I'd love to go to that in more detail, but I'm mindful of everyone's time. Just take a minute to reflect on that. So let's check back in on our agenda. I know we've gone at pace, but I just wanted to get that big picture thinking out there and paint a picture and check in with you. What we're going to do now is in a minute, I'll talk you through one of our overall core offerings and then we'll bring it to life. And during that time, Ed and Alexandra are going to share some brilliant models you can take away and also some practical, tangible tips. I mentioned up front, we're flexible. This is just an example of what we'd love to take managers through. A kickoff with leadership is very important that we're conscious about approaching hybrid. So actually a kickoff that says you're not just going to an LHH session. This is about our company driving these things. And then I'll do the sessions first, and then we'll do the options at the bottom, the Lumina and the group coaching. Hybrid leadership is where we'll explore some of those big big picture things. So a lot of us work in the people industry here, but actually if you're a day-to-day manager, actually will you have really had the chance in a structured environment to think about some of those big pictures and how you'll adjust those. So that would be, what types of work do we think are appropriate for home versus not? How am I going to get this to work for my team? Strive to Thrive is then about that flexibility element and actually saying, I'm going to be that manager who trusts my team, gets the best out of them. And in that, one of the key underpinning things is empathy. So Ed's going to talk us through about some key focus areas and models around empathy. We talked about the progressive drift across teams, and hybrid collaboration is going to be what Alexandra brings partly to life, talking about the role that psychological safety has to play. And actually, how do we keep our teams growing and building? Performance management, there are numerous biases that apply when we performance manage someone in a hybrid world. How am I going to know that if somebody turned up and they weren't really prepped, what's their overall picture of work? How are things for them? How am I going to stop myself being biased in my decision making and make a true assessment myself and a truthful playback that really connects with someone? We know this is tough. We've talked about burnout, so we talk about creating and maintaining a resilient team. And the last one is around hybrid for all. So we know that there are certain employee pockets, and Gartner came out with some really startling stats actually about the impact of wellness on, for example, primary caregivers. If you're a primary caregiver and you're in a hybrid environment, you've contracted with your family about what the working pattern will be. Now you're having to go in a bit more, potentially all the time. Actually, how do we make sure that you don't accidentally marginalize and push out individuals from various diverse backgrounds, and make sure that it is an ongoing environment people want to take part in? So that's the overall flow. And then some options that we love to include, they really are massive value adds. The Lumina assessment, I'll talk about a range of assessments, but just having learners them, and the power of somebody saying, okay, I'm in the green quadrant of this Lumina. That means that I may identify with this kind of style and behavior. Where could the risks be for me? That degree of personalization really does add a great deal to the amount individuals learn. And then ongoing group coaching, we know this is an evolving piece, trying to help you get started on a journey where you're talking to peers, talking to colleagues, and actually building an evolving approach is really important. So that's overall what we like to cover. And now I'm going to hand over in a minute to Alexandra. But I just really wanted to drop off by saying thank you so much to everybody for listening to these big picture things. We know it's an evolving piece, and we're really happy to keep talking. If there's anything you want to explore, big picture, we'd be really happy to that. So hopefully I'm vaguely on time, and I'll now hand you over to Alexandra and just thanks.
And while I navigate to the right slide in our presentation, Tim, what would you say is the overarching benefit of doing a program with us? So there's a lot in there that we were sharing around. These are 2-hour long programs and the group coaching element. But what would be the thing that you would want to highlight about the program in itself?
Thanks, Alexandra. That's really really good question. So there are a few things. I think firstly, everybody here has a day job of executing their people management, people leadership tasks. Actually having somebody come in externally who can step back a bit, have the bandwidth to customize content for you, check in with you, bring a little bit of perspective. So we always respect confidentiality, but actually somebody goes, well, actually, there's an idea that this group picked up on. Here's an idea. So that cross-pollination of ideas, the external viewpoint, and then the fact that a lot of this content has been tested and proven. So we're always very hot on measuring outcomes, making sure people feel confident they've got a spring in their step. That would be the third element, is the kind of soundness of input. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and I agree with what you were saying, and I think my one additional perspective would be that our program is completely fitted to how people are working at the moment. Very, very often we hear that we give a good cadence of reflection and people then attending programs, which actually allows them to put things immediately into practice. And through the group coaching elements, we actually challenge some of the beliefs, mindsets that are still being carried from a pre-hybrid era, and are still being prevalent in organizations. So you were talking about three things today, which were, we are still striving for an equality of experiences instead of equality of opportunities in organization, which is not quite helping matters when it comes to hybrid. There is still a massive bias towards managers wanting to see people, wanting to see what they are working, which is especially alarming because we know that more women are preferring working in a hybrid way. So not only we had a pandemic of disadvantaging females, but they prefer to work more from home, and will they be disadvantaged going forward unless we do not shift some paradigm here? So it is really, really important to think about, what are all these things that we need to shift, and there's a lot of mindset shifts that our program is built in to do so. And one of the key elements, so Tim, you were talking about building purpose, you were talking about creating alignment in an organizations, and most importantly, making sure that people feel like they belong. All of these require psychological safety in order for them to happen. So what I'm going to do next is going to give you a taster, a very, very short taster from one of our programs as to how do we bring psychological safety to life for the managers, or what are the things that we talk with leaders, with managers, when it comes to the area of psychological safety. And I will be sharing some very, very quick tips and some very, very quick tools that can be immediately put into action, and people can run with it. Because the other thing that we are finding when delivering our courses is people are always looking for a silver bullet, and we always have to disappoint them that there's no such thing when it comes to mindset shifts. We all need to put in the hard work, but if we are able to give them something that they can immediately start to work with, then they are definitely going to go into action, which is what I'm going to share today. So I wanted to first baseline as to what do we mean by psychological safety, because it's a term that has been, I would almost say, overused in the last 18 months. But I'm not sure whether we are all agreeing what psychological safety is. And I really love Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety and her definition, which is psychological safety being the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So psychological safety is not about giving certainty to people, but it is about inviting them to the table. It is about ensuring that whatever their concerns are, whatever their questions are, whatever their mistakes are, that they are being dealt with in a way that they do not feel that they would be, they would be feeling excluded after the certain thing happened. So then it begs the question of what happens where there's no psychological safety. What happens when people are not able to bring their ideas, to bring their concerns? We know from research that this can show up in different ways in an organization, but Tim was already talking about a decrease in employee engagement, the decrease in team innovation, the decrease in team collaboration. And at the end of the day, it would lead to decrease in solving complex problems, thinking strategically, performing to the best of our ability, fostering cooperative relationships, and most importantly, what I'm observing with the teams that I'm working with is there's a lot of resentment that people are holding. What happened during the pandemic is we were going from one call to the other, and we didn't necessarily took time to check in with people. If someone said something that we might have found hurtful, we probably didn't have the time to then, to just check in with them whether they've actually meant it the way it came across. And because it was a small thing, that we otherwise would have been able to deal with, with a cup of coffee if we want into each other in the office, it felt not okay to schedule in a call to talk about something that otherwise was probably nothing, but we were carrying it. But many people report of some small little thing that happened during the pandemic, that they felt excluded, that they felt hurt, and they are carrying that resentment, which now they are reporting to be, lack of psychological safety. And I'm, at the end of the day, what that means, there's going to be lack of energy in the team. Less and less people will be taking an initiative, and most alarmingly, people will be not owning up to mistakes or covering up mistakes, which we know from different crises where it could lead us to. But I would be curious to hear from our listeners today. What are you observing in your organization? What behaviors are you observing that makes you believe that there is lack of psychological safety? So going on to Menti, using a code 24238789. I'll be curious to hear from you, what behaviors are you observing that makes you believe that there's lack of psychological safety? And while the answers are coming through, Tim and Ed, from the customers that you've been working through, have you got any examples of what you've observed when they didn't have psychological safety?
Yeah, we've a number of clients where they've actually, there was one, I can't share the details, but we have one client who had a critical proposal that was due to go in. They just gave this anecdote about how people had come so late to the party with content. And then actually the content was totally disjointed. And they had a debrief afterwards, and all the stuff that they were talking about was just noise. And just could have been resolved if people were in that office environment. The cogs are just not connected at all. And we get anecdotes like that all the time. Yeah, it just shows up all over the place. And I imagine just looking at some of these, something a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, I can see that there's like people are saying, I'm fine. What do you think about that, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. How are people actually really feeling? Do they actually want to sort of share a little bit of what they're actually, what's going on in their heads? I mean, a lot of clients talk to us about that you're not really getting to the heart of the issue, because people are just, because the trust isn't there. I think they're nervous about, as it says here, raising issues. And you hear it a lot from clients that people are just nervous of that, of sharing. They don't want to show vulnerability. They feel like somehow that isn't relevant, I think, as well. That's what they say. That it's part of my job to do that. I work very much sort of out in the sort of the Far East, and they say, well, we don't need to have feelings. We just need to get our job done. But actually, therefore, does a team really get to the heart of the matter? Yeah. Do they really get down to the sort of, really knowing each other as individuals?
And in effect, in both cases, what I'm hearing, there's a lot of energy lost on something that's not delivering value at the end of the day. And also what I'm reading from people with, working all hours, fatigue, with recurring issues, lack of risk-taking, irritability, tribalism, cohesive culture is an issue. So all of these things are suggesting that at the end of the day, we are spending our energy on things that are not benefiting anyone. They are not. They are not pointing towards the purpose. They're not pointing towards energizing. It is suggesting that people are struggling with their belonging. If there's more and more tribalism and then more and more defensive behavior and the more and more silos, which I've read in one of the comments. I love this one: over consultation and moving slowly. This is a typical one where when you are so afraid of upsetting people because of lack of psychological safety or lack of repercussions, then you end up moving slowly. Fear of the future and fear of missing out at the same time. Yeah, in many cases, in the hybrid work environment, women have shared that one of their biggest concerns is will they ever get promoted now that they want to spend more time working from home. And we know that they are more productive, but then, are the repercussions going to be again that then at the end of this they are not going to get promoted? The other one, managers demonstrating mistrust because they can't see their people. This is the one that I was talking about, big one. We know that's a very, very big problem, and we know from research that at the end of the day, people are not less productive when working from home. Yet this very, very old bias towards wanting to see people is there, and it's strong, and we have to work on the mindset and shifting mindsets around that. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing. And why don't you stay on, because I will have another question for you in a minute, if that's okay. I would be curious to hear your viewpoints. But when we are talking to managers, we are always thinking about psychological safety as 3 key components. So in our workshops, we don't want to make it a too big an unreachable concept, but something that they can immediately check if they've got or not got with their team, or start or being able to start to have a conversation about. And it's quite easy to check if people are feeling safe to speak up, or the managers themselves can check if they are giving default trust to people, or is it safe to fail. On a one-on-one basis, the managers can be curious about it, whether this is true. But worst comes to worst, the engagement results will be quite clear on the other hand, whether people are feeling safe to fail, safe to speak up, or whether they are feeling trusted within the organization. And in order for default trust to be there, it's not only enough that the manager gives default trust to people, that and says that I do trust that you are going to be doing a good job, but there needs to be a shared meaning, a shared expectation in an organization. And I'm curious again on this side, Ed and Tim, when I say shared meaning or shared expectations, what are different things that you are seeing that seems to be working really well?
For me, I mean, one of the things is that we do a lot with sort of teams working in the IT is that there's a degree of setting out a set of ground rules as to how we're going to work, and actually really diving into it and actually making those really explicit in terms of what does this mean for us when we say that we trust. And a lot of things get bound up into it, but making it really, really overt, actually, and almost making that a charter as a team or a contract. Say, look, we agree that we will, and I won't criticize you for doing so, being candid with each other, that I will empower you and trust you to do X, Y, and Z. And that is almost subscribed to. And that's very much what I hear from a number of different teams that I've dealt with over the past few years, that they do contract it quite deeply to make sure that that's there.
Yeah, good one.
My only build would be, a lot of this, what you see helping in the hybrid world, is just the relentless application of key basic principles. So almost nudging this culture of psychological safety along at the end of every meeting. Okay, folks, you're clear and comfortable. You're clear and comfortable. Okay, right, and just make sure there's a constant handshake. So it's very important to have a break point saying, right, we want to do hybrid, right? This is a big part of it. But then what are those day-to-day, hour-to-hour, week-to-week activities? That'd be my only build.
Yeah, and the two summaries are really, really great. So, having that team charter of behaviors and continuously revisiting it. It's not just having it, but then revisiting it. Is it still relevant? Is it still working? Are we still feeling that this is serving us? How do we need to move? How are we going to focus on the outcomes versus whether we've been in the office or not? How are we going to have a discussion about it as to how do we want to collaborate? All of these things are very, very important. And then when
sorry, I was going to just say, and it also displaces sort of responsibility from both parties. You say, this is the document. The document is the third party element here. We both look at this document and examine whether it's working. It's not just for the leader to sort of waggle their finger at the team and say, look, let's revisit what we agreed as a team psychologically to do. And I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely. And then there's a safe to fail and a safe to speak up element as well, which is the safe to fail one is one that I'm going to share in a minute too. So I'm going to hold asking questions about it. But when it comes to safe to speak up, anything that comes to your minds that you would recommend or you would want to talk to with managers about this element?
I'll dive first if that's all right. I think there's a real skill in managers of even if an idea is atrocious, the language you use and just saying thanks for that, reflections on that, questions on that, and coaching someone out of a negative idea, that takes practice, and it doesn't come naturally to everybody. But almost just practicing that sort of conversation by conversation style is very important, and a key part of that is looking in the mirror. So I think managers have got to have a break point here where they say, actually, let's have a conversation here. I want some honest feedback on how I build this. So those are my 2 pence.
I think for me, one of the things that comes out from this being sort of a raving extrovert, but actually when you're handling introverts in the team is to warn, not to warn them, but to make it safe by saying, I really value your opinion, and not to spring that on them, but to say, look, I'm going to be asking your view on a couple of things next week. Can I send you an email on that or a document for you just to review? And almost playing it back and saying, I know you don't like things immediately sprung on you. I know you like to reflect, but I'm going to ask you your view. So I think there's a thing there about when you really know your people as well, that the confidence comes through by not just leaping on certain people, but actually acknowledging that they don't like that. And this is how we're going to manage it. Or I will manage it with you so that you are confident to come forward. When I say, John, what's your view at this point? Oh, thanks. Well, I've got this for you. And it's normally a superb piece of input as well.
Great one. And building on that, and if it's a immediate conversation where everyone builds up, giving permissions for those who are more introverted or like to reflect a little bit of saying, this is where we got to, but I can give you 2 more days if you want to think about it and have got something different, because I don't want to lose that input. And then also, and going back to what Tim was saying, agreeing with the team of how are we going to do this? So where is a deadline on the decision? When is it that we've decided on something that then there wouldn't be again resentment in the team about, oh, I was able to make a decision at this point in time, but we gave them an additional 2 days, so we are delayed by 2 days, which is one of the typical challenges that would come in a situation. But if you contract with the team that this is going to happen, then people are more accepting of this. And I'm curious to hear from our listeners when they hear safe to fail, safe to speak out, or giving default trust to our organization, where do they see the room for improvement in the organization? And while we do that, let me just check the comments, and there's a lot here that would be really interesting to bring in. So Bethan has added that as a manager, you need to show your own vulnerabilities and lead by example with discussing mistakes, challenges, areas for improvement. Otherwise, the team will remain uncomfortable to speak up and feel safe. Such an important message, Bethan. I know that when I led a team of 13, I didn't appreciate that one of the biggest flows as a manager is from that I displayed was coming across as the person who got it all together. Because but I worked really hard at the back to come across as the person who got it all together, but it was alienating everyone. They felt like they can't do mistakes. They felt like that, where I am is unreachable, which was absolutely untrue if I'm brutally honest, but it was absolutely alienating for people. So that point, Bethan, that you are saying around the mistakes, challenges, vulnerability is so important. And yes, I can see, the comment about Patrick Lencioni has done some great work in teams on trust and false harmony. Yeah, it all starts there. In order for teams to be functioning, the foundation of that is trust and creating trust. But it's the manager who will set the tone. Janice said that I like the message on needs of introverts. It's important we build on general good practice in people management, in diversity and inclusion. And the same applies for, any other diversity, because it's not just introvert and extrovert. It's about neurodiversity as well. It's about diversity of background. It can be language diversity. I've been working with a client recently where the biggest challenge is a language diversity. It's not everyone is a native English speaker, and those who aren't, they feel less included because they aren't given enough time to be able to get their points across. And I'm just looking at our mentee scores at the moment, and I'm not surprised that safe to fail is one of the biggest challenges in organizations. It is the theme that comes out most in our conversations, but safe to speak up and default trust, as you can see, is the second after it. So all three is something that we would advise managers to focus on. And what are some of the tools that I'm going to share before handing over to Ed? One key element is using feed forward. So everyone loves the term in brackets. Let me give you some feedback. But if we use the term, this was great and it would be even better, X, Y, and Z, people are much more open to hear the feedback or the thing that needs to be changed, because it's something that they can take charge of, because they wouldn't be fixing the past, but they would be creating something for the future. It is something where there isn't there isn't a conflict of right or wrong, and it becomes much faster and it becomes much efficient to give feedback. And going to that point that Tim was making about making sure that at the end of the meeting we check on is everyone clear. That is also a great point, to use the feed forward and using the technique of what do we want to improve. Is there something that would have made this meeting even better? Because then again, it just becomes part of the culture. Because at the moment, again, with the shying away from giving each other feedback, we lose this very, very important ability to start a conversation to improve things for the better. The other very, very key tool that we share with managers to use as part of their meetings to encourage people to feel safer is to change the language and not just talk about these are the things that I've tried and succeeded, but these are the things that I've tried and failed, but talk about all those things that they've failed to try as well, so that the failure becomes less of a badge of shame for the individuals, but it becomes a language around experimentations, about curiosity, about what else is going on in the organization, and with giving structure for having a conversations around all three areas. What people are looking at, it becomes much wider, and people all of a sudden start to see opportunities that they haven't seen before. Yet again, another fantastic tool to talk about, safety to fail. And finally, this will come across obvious, but the third most important thing that we know is so important for people to feel okay to fail is for them to know that someone is holding their bag. But in order to be able to do that, managers need to know their people. They need to do what they want to get better at. They need to know how they feel they give the most value, and they need to know what energizes them most. And all these three are things that are requiring a lot of empathy, which is something that Ed will be talking to us about. So I'm gonna pass you on to
That's very kind, thank you.
Safe hands to talk about empathy and how we talk about empathy to our managers. Thank you.
Well, we hope so. Okay. Empathy and empathetic leadership, stepping into the shoes of others. Oh, dearie me. I guess what a pickle I would describe it as. We live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and a requirement for a number of different leadership competencies at the moment. And then certainly, I think we'd all agree that this VUCA world is now at the point of a perfect storm. Social and political unrest. The Institute of Economics has pointed that actually there's 9 years in a row. Unrest is at the highest it's ever been over those 9 years. If you add in this wonderful, in inverted commas, situation of COVID-19 and its global pandemic, and all the resultant effects that it's having on us around the agenda of wellness. If you were talking to people about mental health a decade ago, they look at you like you were misled. It's interesting. I've been dealing very much with sort of master's level qualifications at CMI over the past few years, and in fact, one of the modules is actually strategic handling of wellness and mental health in an organisation. Just never seen that a decade ago. There's changing perceptions in the workforce. We are in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, the digitisation, the hyperconnectivity, and of course, hybrid working, which we've been talking about. We are in this perfect storm. And of course, what that means is, of course, that it is a requirement for, I mean, leadership is leadership for me, but there's a leaning in here. The Ask of Leaders has highlighted a need to adjust the graphic equalizer of people's leadership. Of course, different styles required for different times in the working day. But there's three elements here. Pre-pandemic, job skills were in the sort of the dark color there, but actually now post-pandemic, there's a look and a requirement for these new skills around compassion, quality of having positive intentions, a real concern for others, an interpersonal sensitivity, reading the traits of non-verbal cues, not always easy in a hybrid world, and actually appreciating people. In fact, I was on a call this morning that one of the themes that's coming across is people just do not feel appreciated. And I'll share with you a few trends in a moment, that actually leaders need to be demonstrating all these three things: compassion, interpersonal sensitivity, and actually appreciating people as individuals, and looking for and nurturing and recognizing the very best in their people. I think it's always been there for me, but I think there's never been more of a requirement than it is now, that leaders dial this up as much as they possibly can. We're never going to talk about the full story within this next sort of 20 minutes or so, but it's important that we set out here really the business case for empathy is quite clear. Recent Harvard articles claiming that those with empathy and emotional intelligence are outperforming by 20%. But we know it's about more innovation, better engagement. Of course it would be, and retaining people. People feel inclusive because, of course, if the leaders are demonstrating that empathy, people are feeling that they're part of that crew. And I think what's really key for me is this work life, that when people are feeling that their leaders are more empathetic, 86% reported they are in a better place to navigate the demands of their work and life, which really speaks to what the backdrop of where we are at the moment. So if you can do this empathy better, people are going to be able to navigate what's going on for them at this present time. Recent trends. Conclusions are always drawn. I don't think we're through the pandemic, but from 2020 to 2021, that actually leaders, and this won't surprise anybody on this call, that are struggling to fully empathize with their people for a number of different reasons. And actually, employees are expecting more from their employers within this pandemic situation. Diversity and equality efforts are not resonating with all employees. Mental health remains, to a degree, still stigmatized, but I do think progress is being made on that. It's certainly more on the agenda, more talked about, more widely. Certainly, you know, my children at school age, and that's very much discussed there. And the younger generation expecting more organizational empathy from their bosses, whether they're receiving that or not. CEOs acknowledge that and see that empathy is really, really important, but are unclear on what they need practically to do to get that moving. And a quarter of employees seeing it as sufficient. What is empathetic leadership then? Seeing things from another person's frame of reference. Many of you will have obviously heard of Daniel Goleman. Placing yourself in someone else's shoes. So it's an ability to understand how they feel. That's the cognitive bit. Identify with their feeling, and actually therefore to act and do good for others, the compassionate. So sort of three component parts of it. That's all pretty academic. I think something that is quite nice is this work here from the former nurse. She looks at this here and discusses four key elements. Professor Theresa Wiseman wrote this article in 2007 and said, look, ultimately there's four key elements of empathy here. How people see their world. We need to appreciate them as human beings and be entirely non-judgmental, understand their feelings, and be able to communicate an understanding of where they're at. Now, I'm just going to sort of unpack that a little bit in the time we've got, just to sort of show you some of how we bring some of this sort of the modeling to life here. So first of all, how people see the world. And of course, that's changed quite a lot, really, from home working, or is it office working? Is it moving in the hybrid world between the two? But actually, you know, this is difficult for people. They've got used to being at home during lockdown. Some are drifting back into the office. Some are doing, okay, I'll do 3 days at home, 2 days in the office. That's actually tremendously disruptive and stressful for people. So actually really seeing some of this. One of the models that I really like here around sort of empathy and really seeing things from another person's point of view is this model. It's an NLP model from Grinder and Delosier called the perceptual positions model. And what it requires you to do is walk around a situation and actually physically put yourself in another person's point of view, and actually to even adopt a point of view here in the top called position 3, where you're looking into the situation from outside of there. I used this model to great effect years ago. I was living in a small cottage. I lived down in the southwest by the sea, and I basically, myself and my wife, I'm in a family, and we had a small house near the sea, and we wanted to put an extra floor on it. Why? Because everyone wants a sea view if you live by the sea. And the chap behind me was an older guy. He's in his sort of early 70s, retired, and he was living behind me, so on the banks of a river. So he's behind me. He's got his sea view. He's got his river and sea view. I wanted that view. This guy George. So my position south there, looking at the situation, I was going to put another floor on my house, and I went and have a chat with George, who lived behind me as a neighbour. He'd also added another floor so he could get a spectacular view of the sea. I went to speak to George and said, "Look, George, could I have a chat with you? I'm thinking of doing some house renovations." George immediately crossed his arms, stepped back, and looked mightily dischuffed with me. And I was saying, "Well, okay, well, look, I'm just going to talk to you because I want to do this renovation, and it's going to mean a little bit of sort of disruption, and also a little bit of your view might go." It wasn't going to be a lot. The arms crossed and the step back meant to me, okay, he's not happy. He really isn't happy with this at all. And it turned into a conflict situation. I wanted it done. He didn't want this work done. He raised objections. So as far as I was concerned, you know, this guy was just standing in my way.
I think Ed's internet connection must have.
I think maybe his neighbour, yeah, as somebody said, as George pulled the plug. Okay.
Yeah, so I think the key point with what Ed was trying to convey is understanding, you know, what is the other person's positions and being able to put yourself in their show. And I can see that, you know, David is commenting, it left us all on a cliffhanger. Yeah, I think we are all curious now. What's the end of the story? But the key point, while we are waiting for Ed to rejoin with this part of the empathetic leadership, is very often managers, because they are just so focused on what is it that I'm measured on, what are the things that I need to deliver in order to hit our KPIs, that they just see, you know, this is the thing that's getting in my way, and this is the thing that aren't getting in my way, and therefore they very often do not consider the impact of their actions or how it might come across. There's a great question in the Q&A that we'll spend a little bit more time, you know, but you know, if we are thinking about the manager who wants to wants everyone to be in the office 9 to 5, and making sure that they are present 100% all the time, you know, it might alienate those who have got small kids. It might alienate those who are primary caregivers. But what they are focusing on is, I've got these KPIs, I want to make sure that everyone works in the team, and they feel like that's their only way of doing it. But they do not put themselves in the shoes of the other, because if they were to put themselves in the shoes of the other and look at the dad with a toddler and twins, and I'm looking at you, Tim, here, you know, at the end of the day, your productivity, you know, while you are managing the family at home, hasn't decreased during the time of the pandemic. And actually being able to work from home allows you to continue to contribute. And actually, if you were to first to be in the office 9 to 5 every single day, that's when your productivity will decrease, because not only would you be sleep deprived from the fact that there are 2 under 1-year-olds in the household, but on top of it, you would have to commute at least an hour back and forth. So those are the things. And if someone is able to step into that search, that's when we can create the equality of opportunities for everyone to do their best work, which is, you know, one of the key things with empathy and what we want to talk about. Yeah, I can see.
I've got Ed's content, and what I might do is I'll just canter us through at the end, and let's hope Ed joins. And thanks, Alexandra, for keeping running. I can't tell you how the story ends. So, you know, our promise to you is if you pick up with a client partner about following up with us, then we will, of course, make sure that we do conclude the story for you. But let's get these on screen.
Let's double up on the rest of Ed's story.
Yeah. So hopefully you can see now. Let me just double check here. Let me just get into present mode. Hopefully you can all see Ed's model. So effectively, imagine you're a manager and you're in that heated situation, or you've just got that deadline. This is just a really simple exercise you can do just to step yourself out. Now, we all know, hopefully, being L&D and HR professionals, the conscious competence model. And to get into an empathetic team environment, okay, some managers will have to start practicing this, particularly in a hybrid environment. So we talk through saying, okay, write down your viewpoint, get that clear. All the emotional noise may be going on for you. Actually, get it out of your emotional part of your brain. Just jot your perspective down. Right, now take a moment. Imagine you're the observer. You know, what might an observer have picked up on when they were in that meeting with us, when you put that idea forward? And now it's easier to do it that way than to step into the other person's shoes. So I've had conversations where I've been very heated up with people and someone's gone, how do you think they might feel? I'm not ready to go there. So we try to say, like, go around, start with someone else observing, and then cool yourself down, and then look back. So you can do that outside of the moment. And what you find is over time, you get better at doing that in the moment and just slowing yourself down. It takes practice and effort. So that was what we were going to cover there. We've talked a little bit about burnout and actually how we can go from eustress into deep stress. And this is where particularly it gets important to cover off actually the impact and be empathetic to one another as we start to see the impact of stress. And building that holistic picture of our employees, somebody who's got a commute, somebody who's got multiple kids, as Alexandra mentioned, really important. Ed is here now. So Ed, if you can briefly conclude the story, and I've left us, your story had a cliffhanger, and I've left us with this image of the donkey.
I'm back.
So Ed, I'm going to unshare mine because I slightly tweaked.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was just saying to err is to be human, but when things go wrong, you really need a computer. So thank you so much for picking up there. If we can see some stuff on the chat here about, what do we do if this is a metaphor for our people? What can we do if we understand them to rebalance here? What can we do for poor Mr. Donkey here to get their hooves back on the get them moving again? Because actually there's something here for us to think about in terms of if we can really empathize and understand what's going on for people. This is how people feel. Thoughts on the chat on what we do for poor Mr. Donkey here, who's looking slightly bemused and confused. What have we got coming up here? Aha. Lighten the load, absolutely reduce the load, share the load out. So either, share the boxes with other donkeys, put yourself in his shoes first. Absolutely. There's all sorts of things. What does this donkey actually need? Probably a partner next to them. Okay, somebody by the side of them. Do we lighten that load for them? Do we move the load forward? Do you redistribute that load? There's a number of different things we can do. So we're either helping with their coping mechanisms, which is on the donkey side and putting somebody by the side of them, and that can be you. Let's pull that cart down, or actually, do we need to move some of that off? But if we can really understand that, we can rebalance that for people. And I really, really like this image because it really gets me thinking about, do people feel like this? I know I have felt like that, and do people even notice? Do leaders even care that they're like that, and they have actually no ability to get traction because they're on that side of the stress curve? And they can be hanging there for some time. So there's a number of different things we can do, but it comes from a place of empathy, first of all, to say, look, I can see that you're completely overwhelmed here. We need to get somebody alongside you, as I say, or some other mechanism for you to shift that stuff around. So okay, so let's go back to this. So, understanding a little bit about that and communicating as well. One of the models that we'll go through with you and that we can share is around this OQS model, about actually being able to communicate well with people. Listen to what's being said and what's not being said. How are things being said today to you? Is the behavior changing in some way? And actually querying that, labeling it and saying, look, I'm noticing this. This is how it's making me feel. I'm slightly concerned. I'm worried. How are you feeling at the moment? And empathizing. And I can see that this is difficult for you. Huge dollops of listening. How can I help? Sharing your perspective to get this sort of solved. But one of the things that's probably burning in your minds is actually, do we have to over-egg this, Ed? Is there a danger here? And there absolutely is. That empathy is just one element here, that we need to adopt this wise compassion matrix I really, really love. And it's about being wisely compassionate. Box one, caring avoidance. We don't want to sort of be completely over the top with this in terms of our communication, so on, that actually we're being so empathetic. Yeah, I understand. We've got to sit within this box too, that we need to get still make the tough decisions, still fulfill our organizational objectives at the same time, and balance the concern between the individual and the organization as well. Within leadership development, it's always been a conversation about task and team. All team, the task doesn't get done. All task, you look behind you and your team isn't there either. Clearly, we don't want to be, indifferent and ignorance, lack of compassion and wisdom. And also, we don't want to be absolutely, and is there a danger of that, hammering people to achieve business objectives? At the end of the day, that people are therefore sitting in that, I'm thinking about leaving quadrant. So with that in mind, empathetic, challenging conversations can take place where you can be fairly sort of direct, candid, open, non-judgmental, but sort of more low in intensity. So that's about the body language bit. And it's about really here with empathetic, challenging conversations about recognizing that collectively that can be solved, and that it's about the problem, not necessarily about the person. It's recognizing that the person is part of this, but the focus should be on, okay, how do we get this done? So the message that I want to bring across here is that with empathetic leadership, it's not about always just completely sugarcoating the pill. You can still have these direct conversations, but they still can be empathetic at the same time. Some of this stuff, Tim and Alexandra's already mentioned, that actually there's some fundamental leadership actions that need to take place here. Have some compassion towards yourself first. They always say, that there's that metaphor about, you're in an aircraft and it's losing height, you're sitting next to your child and the oxygen mask drop down. Which one do you put on first? Well, you put on first your own mask, because you can't look after other people if you don't look after yourself, because if you're unconscious, you can't guide it towards your child. And there's some stuff about role modeling the right behaviors that you want to see in others, and actually role modeling that sort of those with your boss too. Knowing your people. It's been said already on the call, but we say it 3 times: know your people, know your people, know your people. And being lost in your own thoughts is an inevitable danger. And we're talking about mindfulness here, but responding in the here and now, because actually that's the empathetic response. So this is about active listening, building trust, and 2 elements to trust. Stephen Covey talks about it's your character and your competence, your integrity and your intent positively towards people, but also your competence to get stuff done and achieve, which I guess is about tasks, but with a view to also helping other people, teaching other people, and actually learning yourself. There's always 2 elements of trust. Former serviceman myself, and now we used to say in the services, you can't build trust at the line of departure. That means the line of departure is the moment when you go into battle. You don't look to the left and right and you go, sorry, I don't really know your name, but are you with me? Well, I don't even know you, mate. You build trust every single day, every single interaction. I think this is about giving people freedom to make their decisions, and that's linked in with trust, and obviously prompting and boosting and promoting emotional intelligence development training. People talking about their needs and actually delivering feedback with empathy. So navigating that path towards an empathetic organization, there's elements here that we can look at. This is an opportunity for the future to make a real difference. Open dialogue around mental health, promoting diversity, equality and inclusion programs, promoting inclusion, but empathetic leadership at all levels. All the research, all the reading you ever do says actually the tone has to be set from the top, and respecting and understanding people's needs around their time now, and how that can be navigated. But this does represent a great opportunity for the future. A lot of the reports, a lot of the work that's been done at the moment said actually huge strides have been made, but still things could be done better. We've said quite a lot this morning, and thank you for your forbearance on my sort of technical issues there. But these are sort of 7 questions we're going to sort of leave hanging, not necessarily to be answered right now, before we open the floor to a few questions to close up. Do you know, how do people really feel at the moment, and why do they feel like that? And therefore, how they feel, in terms of how they're feeling, how much impact is it this having on their ability to perform in the organization? How much are your people ready and able to give, and what can I do to increase that? How engaged are they feeling with me, their team and leadership in general, and their work they do and the organization? Does the organization's vision still inspire them? Does my leadership still inspire them? Do they still trust me? And finally, do they have the skills needed to thrive and survive in this VUCA world that I described at the beginning? I'm going to stop sharing there. Again, thank you for your patience this morning. And it might be time for a couple of questions. Constance, we're right up against it there, Tim, but there may be.
Was the question, how do you make people want to come back rather than feeling forced?
Yes.
Right. So there's a few things that some of our clients are doing, trying to establish a rhythm of when people are in, trying to make their office space more purposeful towards collaboration, actually connecting with teams and trying to get some non-work buttressing around the working day. So a great thing a lot of teams are doing now is their next quarter's away day or all team meetup, trying to make that a hybrid event just so that people start to go in and you get that momentum injected in. Very happy to pick that offline with anybody who wants to know more about that.
I had a question about what happened to George. I was just getting into my flow there, Tim, and yeah, George and I came to the court. It was basically for me to really empathise about how he felt about that situation, and I found that model, and I do commend it to you, that perceptual positions model, about actually stand where he stands and feel what he feels, and then you get a little bit more about what he's thinking. So yeah, thanks. Tim and I will, George and I were all in good terms now, so please don't worry.
There's one other question. How is innovation and collaboration measured? So if it was not measured before, how can it now be measured after and also retrospectively?
Great question. So that was lifted from a Gartner report. So we will go back to the source and double check the method they used to achieve that. My assumption would be it will be asking people for their perception on whether it is improved or not. But whoever answered that will get your email address and we'll send you the answer straight afterwards.
Perfect. And that's it from the question from the chat function.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Yeah, we look forward to talking through any of this at greater length on anything you found interesting today. Ed, Alexandra, thank you so much. Thanks to Graham, and thanks to everybody who worked behind the scenes to pull together done